Thank you, Chair. I can confirm you are now live.
Thank you, Simon. So good afternoon and welcome everyone. Yeah, it's 3:01, so I'd like to call to order this July 27th, 2022 meeting of the Heritage Advisory Committee. I'd also like to note that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. And the municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. So with that said, I'd like to move on to our first order of business, and that is the approval of minutes. We actually have two sets of minutes to approve this time from June 22nd and our special meeting last week. Does anyone have any thoughts on those? Are they ready to be approved as they stand? Hearing no objections, could I get someone to move that we approve the minutes? And I guess we can approve both sets at once.
That's correct.
I will move that, Mr. Chair. Lois York speaking.
Thank you, Lois. Anyone to second that?
I can second that, Leslie.
Well, Councillor Hensby, welcome. Anyone care to second the approval of the minutes?
I heard Leslie Digdon seconding those.
Leslie, thank you very much. All right. So can I hear yeas for those who are in favor of accepting the minutes as written?
Yeah.
Yay from me.
Aye.
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 Okay. Any nays? Okay. So the minutes are approved, submitted. Moving on, we have an order of business. Can we get a motion to approve that? There is nothing to add to it. Councillor Hensby, you
so move, Mr. Chairman. If there's no additions or deletions from the clerk, happily move it.
Okay, thank you. Anyone to second that?
It's Cassandra. I can second that.
Thank you, Cassandra. Okay, there is no business arising from the minutes. Does anyone have a conflict of interest in regard to today's issues? No one? All right, that's good. There is no deferred business. I've been informed that we have not received any petitions, correspondence, or delegations. So no information items brought forward. So we can move right on to the main part, and that's item 9, which is a proposal to consider 65 Tulip Street in Dartmouth for addition to the Heritage Registry, and that's case number H00529. And I believe we have a staff report from Jenny.
Hello, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to share my screen here. Give me one moment. Let me know when you can see that. All good?
I can see it, yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Hello, everyone. As Patrick mentioned, I'm here to present on case H00529, which is 65 Tulip Street. The request to include this property in the Registry of Heritage Property for the Halifax Regional Municipality. There we go. So the subject property is located on Tulip Street, which is in downtown Dartmouth, in the neighborhood often referred to now as the Flower Streets. It's located between Beach and Oak Streets and only a few-minute walk from Sullivan's Pond Park, which you can see on the slide there. The property, which is shown here, is located amongst a mixture of single-unit dwellings and multi-unit dwellings of various sizes in a neighborhood that was developed between the mid-19th and mid-20th centuries. Neighborhood was originally known as Austinville, and the home was built from the original Austinville subdivision. Moving right into the evaluation criteria, I'll do what we usually do, which is pause after each criteria and hand it back over to the chair in order to allow the committee to determine their score. So the first criteria is age. The residential development of the Austinville area began in the mid to late 19th century when James Austin sold lots for $100 each to local carpenters and tradesmen. The lot for 65 Tulip Street appears as Lot 30 in the Austinville subdivision from the mid-19th century, and a structure at 65 Tulip Street is visible on the Hopkins 1878 map. Based on this and the presence of some building materials that were identified as being popularly used prior to 1880, it's estimated that the house was built in or shortly before 1878. Therefore, based on the estimated construction date in the 1870s, staff are recommending a score of 13. I'll hand it back over to the chair for a moment.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so we have to get some points for its age. I think the age was very well pinned down in the report, so that would warrant 13. Does anyone want to comment further on scoring a 13 for the age of this property? Could go higher or lower, I suppose.
You can-
The
Staff,
range is nice and broad, and it fits into the middle of it, so I think 13 is appropriate.
okay. Anyone disagree? All right, perhaps a 13 is our choice.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Back to you. Yeah.
Our next category, oh, 1 second here, sorry. There we go. Our next category is historical importance. This property is being evaluated under the historical relationships side of historical importance. It's related, so the house at 65 Tulip Street is highly representative of working class residential growth and industrial development in Dartmouth in the mid to late 19th century. The house is intimately related to the Gates family. Members of the Gates family were known to have immigrated to Nova Scotia in 1751, and a later descendant, John Gates, was born in 1817, and he had 5 children, which included Archibald Geshin Gates and Albert Gates. All of his male descendants in the family were carpenters or painters during this period. Archibald Geshin Gates was the designer and builder of 65 Tulip Street, while Albert Gates resided in the house. His brother Albert Gates resided in the house. Albert Gates's descendants did own the house for 81 years following its construction. The Gates family, as a family of builders, carpenters, and painters, likely contributed significantly to the streetscapes in and around downtown Dartmouth, which are still found there today, both in the Flower Streets neighborhood where this property is located, and in other neighborhoods. The skill and the craftsmanship of the builders in the family is well documented in the interior details at 65 Tulip Street, as shown on this slide. We're lucky enough to have some photographs from the interior from the applicant. As a member of the working class, the family largely remains little documented. However, Albert Gates and his family did make notable contributions to the construction of 19th century neighborhoods in Dartmouth, many of which are still standing today and build the streetscapes that we experience today. So staff are suggesting that this property be scored under the local category for its relationship to important occasions, institutions, personages, or groups, and a score of 11 to 15 is recommended. I will hand it back over to the chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think local historical importance is probably the most appropriate category, and that gives us a range of 11 to 15 points. Does anyone want to suggest what might be most appropriate?
I'll be happy with a 13 in the middle. The Gates name is more known in my area on the Eastern Shore than the Gates Brook area, so it's unique to see it spelt the 3 different ways as is shown in the report.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the name too. I had the same thoughts. And they were a typical working class family. So that's certainly one reason to take a look at this property. There are not as many working class homes as there ought to be, perhaps. And it's also, as the report said, very closely connected to other homes in the neighborhood, both in style, but also by the very same builders in some cases. So I would go for a 13, perhaps even a 14.
It's Cassandra. I love the fact that the whole family was in carpentry and home building. And I think that's important. It makes it feel like perhaps there's a whole community connection there. They probably did repairs and helped the whole community with various builds that we wouldn't even know about. So certainly a 13, and I'd be comfortable with a 14, although I wouldn't go as far as a 15.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts? We have 13 or 14. Well, I'm happy to go for a 13 if that reflects what others want. So Simon, perhaps a 13 could be our score.
I would support that.
Thank you, Lois. All right, 13. So back to the presentation.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on to our third category, which is the significance of the architect or builder. So as I mentioned earlier, this property was designed by Archibald Geshen Gates, who was often referred to in historical records as A.G. Gates. Gates is credited for designing and building several Dartmouth houses, and that includes both 11 and 13 Tulip Street, which are shown on the slide here. Based on A.G. Gates's local renown, especially in Dartmouth, staff are recommending a score of between 1 and 3 points for this category. I'll hand it back over to the chair.
Thank you. Although, Jenny, can you tell us those two other houses you showed us, 11 and 13, they're not on the registry, are they?
Sorry, no, neither of those are registered heritage properties.
Just a point of curiosity. Thank you. Okay, so we can score 1 to 3 in terms of the significance of the builder, the architect. Which you've already said, he built his own home, and the family, the entire family was involved.
Mr. Chairman, I would say at least a 2. I would support a 3. It looks like he was quite a productive carpenter in the area. So I guess you could say in times like these we're experiencing now, local contractors are highly valued. So a 2 or a 3 would be nice for me.
Okay. Anyone else?
I would support a 3. I believe the councillor is quite correct. That's almost turning into Gates Row on Tulip Street.
Indeed. All right, so we're leaning toward a 3.
I would support it as well. It's Leslie.
Leslie, okay.
I would also support 3.
Thank you. It sounds like a 3 is called for.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So our next category is category 4A, architectural merit for construction type. So the house at 65 Tulip Street is built of wood framed construction, which is a common type of construction. The building materials such as wrought cut nails have been found by the residents at the house, indicating that the house was built prior to 1880. Many of these building materials were not used following 1880. So based on the relative rarity of this, staff are recommending a score of 1 to 3 for construction type. I'll hand it back over to the chair.
Okay, thank you. So again, 1 to 3 in terms of this property's architectural merit. Does anyone wants to suggest a number to start us off? A 1, a 2, a 3. I love cut nails, so I'm leaning toward a 3 myself. And I think, as the report said, this is the number of features in the house that they stopped using quite soon afterwards. So it's with a 3, perhaps.
It was quite a simple working class construction as a style. So, you know, I don't see, it reminds me a little bit of the Hydrostone design a bit in Halifax, but it was made with stone instead of wood. But you know how simple soapbox square it is, and the pitched roof and stuff. That was my first impression, was Hydrostone-ish like. So I don't know. I give it at least a 2, perhaps a 3.
Any other thoughts on that?
Can I ask about the dormer? Would that have been original, or is that an add-on?
So we'll get into that a little bit more in our next category, where we'll be looking at the architectural merit for the style.
Okay.
But the dormer is likely to have been original to the home.
Didn't the report say it was originally a Scotch dormer, like a five-sided one?
Yes, that was through some restoration that was done to the dormer by the property owner. They did find that it was originally a Scotch dormer.
Well, it's a little changed, but yeah. So we should talk about that in the next on the next slide. So we're hearing a 2 or a 3 for a score for construction type. Jennifer has just joined us. Welcome.
I don't think anybody is feeling confident that it deserves
Yeah,
top of the range there. I think it's probably a 2, Patrick.
that sounds reasonable. Yeah, I'm happy to go for it too.
I would agree with Cassandra. Listen.
All right, 2 it is. Move on to the next slide.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I promised, we are now looking at architectural merit for the style. So the house is considered a vernacular workers' cottage unique to the Austinville area, but as the council mentioned, with similarities to some of the Peninsula North area. Built in this period from the mid-late 19th century. So it's fairly unique to this area from that period. The style has influences from various different architectural styles, including Italianate and Gothic Revival. There's only a very select example of this style that remain in Austinville, that remain intact in Austinville, that is, including shown here 15 Pine Street, which is a registered heritage property, and 43 Dahlia Street. So as you can see, both of these properties retain their Scottish dormers with the five-sided dormer. There are several examples of Austinville style cottages in the flower streets in and around this neighborhood in Dartmouth, which have been significantly modified, including the removal of the dormers, substantial roof line changes, and adjustments to window size and placement. So some of these are shown on the slides here, one on Tulip Street, and then a series on Thistle Street. The character defining elements of this residence include wood cladding, a 3-sided dormer, and symmetrical windows on the front facade. But given that this style can only be found in its original condition in 2 other examples in the Austinville area, it's considered quite rare. Therefore, staff are recommending a score of 7 to 10 points. I'll hand it back over to the chair.
All right, thank you. Okay, so architectural merit, 7 to 10 points. Any thoughts?
Lois here. I'm wondering about this single leaf glazed entrance. Can we have a look at that? I'm not quite sure what it means.
Sorry, one moment here. I'll just have to go back to a picture of the house. So essentially just the single door with glazing in the door. That's what that means. That
Okay.
was anticipated to have been original to the house. There was no evidence. There's no evidence that's been found in the other ones. They have the little storm porch. I'll go forward to that here again. But there was no evidence found of that in this property.
Okay, now I understand, and thank you.
Do you have any other thoughts? Or if anyone would like to suggest a score?
It's Cassandra. The really steep pitched roof is really interesting. I'm used to seeing those in, really snowy parts of Canada, like Quebec, so that the snow would slide off the roofs. I think it's a lot less common in Nova Scotia, and certainly roofs are not going to be built that way moving forward. So I would say an 8 or a 9 here for that reason.
8 or a 9, sounds good. Anyone else? We have an 8 or a 9 at the moment, which I would totally agree with. Not hearing any other suggestions. Suggest a 9, perhaps.
Yay, let's go with a 9.
All right, 9 it is. Thank you, Simon. All right, back to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So our next category is architectural integrity. The house at 65 Tulip Street has a high level of architectural integrity, as was mentioned earlier. Its original 1.5-story cottage form and the front facade remain intact with windows in the entrance in the original locations. There have been some modest modifications over time, likely during the 1960s. Those include the modification of the dormer from a 5-sided Scottish dormer to a 3-sided gable roof dormer. The fieldstone foundation has been faced with concrete parging for reinforcement, and then the construction of a small square addition to the rear of the building, which isn't shown, isn't visible from the front, from the street, and isn't shown in any of the pictures. So based on this, staff recommend a score of 6 to 10 points for architectural integrity.
Okay, so
So if you look at the camera, if you look right in the lens, does it look silver or black?
don't think that's for us. Okay, so a score of 6 to 10.
The screen is
Is there-
closed, so the camera slider's off. So you put your finger right in the back.
Okay, we're getting feedback from someone.
Sounds like IT support for somebody.
Okay. Yep, we're still at it. Okay, so there have been modest changes. I think the changes have been very modest. Perhaps
Yeah.
the house is so
I give it at least an 8 or a 9. You know, like I said, it's still virtually intact the way it was designed and built. So I think it's very modest indeed.
I think if Mr. Gates saw it today, he would not be displeased. It's very similar to what it used to look like. The councillor, you suggest a 9 or a 10?
I said 8 or 9, but
8 or
I'll be
9.
happy with a 9 or 10. Like
I don't want to push you.
No, I'm happy with a 9. You know, I think there's some modest changes, but very little. So
Yeah, I like it too. We hear a 9.
I would support a 9, Lois speaking.
Lois, thank you.
I would as well. It's Leslie.
So it sounds like we're good for 9. Okay, let's go with a 9 then.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So our final category is the relationship to the surrounding area. So 65 Tulip Street, as I've mentioned earlier, is one of the few remaining Austinville style vernacular workers cottages in the surrounding area, and one of even fewer with strong architectural integrity. Most of the examples of this form of house that can be found on the 1878 Hopkins map, where this one is shown, have been either lost or significantly modified over time. Given that the style is highly representative of industrial development and the construction of workers' housing in the 19th century in Dartmouth, the building is considered strongly related to its surrounding area. The block, 65 Tulip Street, also shows a block with a variety of other residences, including a 15-story building built in the mid-20th century and other mid to late 20th century low-rise dwellings. Therefore, it's an important feature in the streetscape as the only home from the original Austinville subdivision, which remains in the immediate vicinity there. And finally, as we discussed with regards to AG Gates, it's notably linked to 11, 12, and 13 Tulip Street, which were also designed by AG Gates, the same designer and builder. Based on its uniqueness as one of the few remaining Austinville-style cottages and its contributions to the largely late 20th century streetscape, staff are recommending a score between 6 and 10 points for this category.
Okay, thank you. So a score of 6 to 10 points in terms of this property's relationship to the surrounding area. Do you have any thoughts on where we might score this? I think I personally would lean toward a higher score based on the reasons we've already mentioned, the Gates family being involved in the neighborhood. So I would go for a 9, I think.
I would support that, Patrick. It's Cassandra.
Sandra, thank you.
I support a 9 as well. You know, it's unique that the Austinville area extends that far from virtually the Birch Cove Park all the way to this end of the river stream, I guess you can say. So it's kind of nice to see one of the original houses still intact in that region. So I support a high score as well.
I would support the 9 as well. It's Leslie.
Leslie, thank you.
I would also support a 9. It's Luke.
As would I, Lois.
Lois, Luke, thank you very much. So it sounds like we're pretty close to unanimous for a 9. So let's go with 9. Thank you, Simon. And I'll turn this back over to Jenny.
Okay, so here is the recommendation that I will now turn back over to the chair. Thank you very much, everybody.
I believe the score came out as 58, if my addition's right. Is that correct? To who's ever charting that?
That's what I got too, but wait for Simon's confirmation.
Yes, that's correct. I can confirm I've counted a 58 as well.
Yes, then you did post that in the chat. So, okay, so success for number 65 Tulip Street. Can I call on someone to read the motion?
It's Cassandra. I'll read it. I love this little house. So the Heritage Advisory Committee recommends that Regional Council set a date. I should start again. I move that the Heritage Advisory Committee recommends that Regional Council, 1, set a date for heritage hearing to consider the inclusion of the subject property in the Registry of Heritage Property for the Halifax Regional Municipality, and 2, approve the request to include 65 Tulip Street, Dartmouth in the Registry of Heritage Property for the Halifax Regional Municipality, as shown on map 1, as a municipal heritage property under the Heritage Property Act.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone to second that motion?
I'll second. This is Luke.
Luke, thank you. So all those in favor, please say aye.
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 I,
Okay, those opposed?
That's affirmative for me. Thank you.
All right. All right, so moving on, we now hear a presentation from staff on development agreements for property south of Harvey Street. This is case number 22728.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Stoddard.
Iona Stoddard.
Yeah.
I sent you a message in the chat, but I don't know if you had a chance to look at it.
Missed it, I'm
I
sorry.
had a heck of a time trying to get in this meeting. I could hear everything that was going on, but you couldn't hear or see me. So I apologize, but I'm back online now.
Okay, we're glad you're here now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. So we're hoping to hear from staff on a development agreement for the property at 5241 through 5247 South Street, which is the Stairs House, already a designated property, 5230 Harvey Street, and 5240 through 5246 Harvey Street. So I will turn it over. I'll turn it over to staff now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, my name is Aaron Marnihan, Principal Heritage Planner with Planning and Development, and I have for you finally a development agreement that has been in the works for a number of years now. Happy to see it come forward to you for evaluation and a recommendation to Halifax and West Community Council today. This is case 22728, and as Mr. Chair said, this relates to Stairs House, which is a registered heritage property on South Street in Halifax. The applicant in this case is WSP Canada. As mentioned, 5241 to 5247 South Street, as well as 5230 Harvey Street and 5240 to 5246 Harvey Street. This is a large through lot, or will be once the parcels are consolidated. And the proposal in this case is for a development agreement to allow the construction of an 8-story plus penthouse multi-unit dwelling with up to 112 units in total. This committee on November the 17th, 2020, approved or recommended in favor of a substantial alteration to alter the registered heritage property, and that included the removal of the existing rear wing, restoration of several character defining elements on the heritage property, and the construction of the 8-story building in the rear. In terms of its context and location, you can see on here a bird's eye view of the Barrington and South Street area. This property borders almost directly on the Old South Suburb Heritage Conservation District and encompasses 3 separate properties at this point, totaling 35,000 square feet. It is currently in the higher order residential designation, and it's surrounded by a mix, as you can see here, of housing forms and commercial uses, including some multi-unit larger buildings. And in terms of the heritage property and its heritage value, it was constructed in 1838. Some of its additions date to the late 20th century. It was built by Norman Fitzgerald Uniacke, who was a lawyer, judge, and political figure in Halifax, and it's most closely associated with William Stairs, who was a very prominent local merchant in the mid-19th century. It's got strong historical associations with early 19th century residential suburban development. At one point, this was essentially an estate that was surrounded a lot by farmland, and really this building would have seen the building up of that area in the 19th century. And its character defining elements relate to its architectural style. And it's undergone significant interior conversion to allow a number of dwelling units on the interior. In terms of the proposal, as mentioned, it's an 8-story plus penthouse residential building that would be connected to the rear of Stairs House by a one-story breezeway, essentially. The rehabilitated Stairs House will contain a number of residential units on the 2nd floor and may contain amenity space or units on the 1st floor. A minimum of 30% of all the units must be 2 or more bedrooms. The applicant has proposed underground parking, but it will not be required as part of the development agreement. And of course, they must complete all of the approved conservation work that was proposed as part of their substantial alteration. Here are some renderings of the proposal. The first one showing a view above South Street, looking northwest. And then the second rendering here, basically from Head Heights coming down South Street. And some renderings showing the Harvey Street frontage. As you can see on the left, there was a really good attempt to match the roofline height of the surrounding buildings, which is a requirement of the policy. In terms of land use policy and regulation, as mentioned, this is the higher order residential designation, which encourages a mix of residential uses and some commercial and institutional uses. It's also within the higher order residential HR1 zone, which does allow multi-unit buildings as of right, but would limit the height to significantly less than what this building is proposing. And the enabling policy in this case is CHR7, which this committee would be familiar with. This is the second iteration of a very important policy for our program, which encourages the adaptive reuse of registered heritage properties by allowing additional density or different uses that may differ from what the underlying zone may allow. So long as the development maintains the heritage value of the property, that its impact on adjacent uses is minimized, that any new construction, additions, or renovations facing a street maintain the predominant street wall height of surrounding buildings, that the proposal complies with wind impact, shadow impact, and density bonusing requirements, and any unregistered historic buildings on the lot are preserved. And I should mention that there are 2 historic buildings that face Harvey Street currently. There was some due diligence to see if those buildings could be retained, and the applicant did actually come up with some designs that may have kept at least the facades of those buildings. However, it was found that they actually are between 10 and 15 feet inside the HRM right-of-way and are currently preventing the sidewalk and the pedestrian right-of-way from being accessible and from being cleared by sidewalk plows. So it was suggested by other HRM staff in our Public Works Department that those buildings should not be retained as part of the development. The initial design, which dates back to 2018, 2019, you can see here with the general massing that was presented to this committee in November of 2020. And the applicant did revise those drawings in 2021, and you can see essentially the mass has remained significantly the same. The separation distance between the registered heritage property and the new building has increased, and instead of a two-story connection between those two buildings, it is now a one-story connection. In terms of the standards and guidelines, the tricky standards for these larger additions is always standard 11, which states that any new work should be physically and visually compatible with, subordinate to, and distinguishable from the historic place. In this case, as with other similar developments such as Victoria Hall, staff advised that due to the massing, including the setbacks and stepbacks, the materials, the muted color scheme, and the muted articulation of the new building, that it doesn't meet that standard by really giving as much prominence to the existing building as possible when viewed from South Street. There was significant public engagement done as part of this application. There were 1,014 notifications mailed out to surrounding property owners and residents, and we did receive 19 written responses. There was support for the restoration of the existing building, and there was some support for the townhouse design of the building along Harvey Street. There was also a number of concerns, including traffic and congestion, on-street parking, the impact of the heights on surrounding properties, lack of sunlight that might impact neighbors, and noise levels during construction. In terms of process, we're here today at the HAC recommendation. From here, it will go to first reading at Halifax and West Community Council, followed by public hearing, at which point the public, of course, will have an opportunity to be heard as part of this process. And then Community Council will make a decision on the development agreement, followed by an appeal period. And I have for you today a recommendation. I'll hand it back to Mr. Chair.
Thanks very much, Aaron. All right, so do we have any thoughts on this proposal? Any concerns? Any praise?
Chairman, I have a question in regards to the building that's in the right of way of the street. We've seen other applications such as the Wellington, as well as over there in Carleton and College Street, of heritage buildings being moved to accommodate the development plans they're hoping to do. Why could not the structure that's in the right of way be pulled back 12 to 15 feet to be out of the right of way and still be retained?
Through Mr. Chair to the councillor. So in this case, that option was extensively analyzed. Unfortunately, the integrity of those buildings was not extremely high. They had been changed quite a bit over the years. They're certainly historic buildings, but I would not describe them as being high integrity. There was concerns about the structural integrity of the buildings as well, to potentially pick those up or even to move them. And of course, there are building code concerns as well, because the proximity of those buildings to the new construction would require a very different fire rating and limiting distance. So that could certainly impact the density that could be achieved on the site. But really, those issues compounded to lead us to suggest that maybe they should not be kept as part of the development.
Well, I've always liked to have the last desperate attempt to preserve wherever we can, and I think that this could have been another one of those unique maneuvers of just pulling a building back off the street and stuff. But if the engineers believe the integrity is not there to move it, that's too bad. I would say, well, why not bump out the street then and put a street bump around the building and so therefore have the width of a sidewalk? Like, can we here we are doing traffic calming in other parts of the city in regards to street bump outs or corner bump outs. Could we not do a bump out around this building to preserve the building?
I can certainly bring that back, Councillor, for an answer when we come back to Halifax and West Community Council. I could bring an answer to you sometime before it goes to first reading if you like. But that process, I believe, would be quite challenging. And if this were a registered heritage property on Harvey Street, obviously our approach would be much different. But just in the case where it's not a registered property and its integrity is fairly low, was determined that that would not be a make or break situation for this proposal.
Okay, well, I think that should be a relevant information to provide to the community council if they want to hear the afterwards. I just want to make sure that all options are on the table for consideration.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other concerns about this proposal? General thoughts?
No, not other than to just sort of echo what was raised by Councillor Hensby. I applaud his efforts there to try to make some last ditch suggestions there, because I mean it is a great shame that a consequence of this development would be the loss of those buildings.
Which is not the first time this has happened either. So yeah, I agree. We have to get more creative. We approach this.
I should mention, Mr. Chair, that criteria in the policy was put in place to ensure that larger developments that might save a single building are not causing the loss of numerous other buildings that have historic value. In this case, we feel that the applicant did do their due diligence in terms of trying to save those properties. But I will mention that there is a early 19th century farm wall on the site that the applicant will be preserving and hiring an archaeologist to essentially disassemble and then reassemble following construction of the new building. So that is a bit of a consolation for those properties along Harvey Street, is that this 19th century wall will be retained.
That is positive. If I could ask a question about parking, which I realize is not required. The proposal we read from the city said that the developer was looking for 34 parking spots. So the Chronicle Herald reported on Monday that he was building 84. I was just wondering if that was a typo or if you can clarify that.
So the developer in this case would be required as of right to provide 36 parking spots under the existing center plan rules. Through this development agreement, we are not requiring any parking spaces, as is fairly typical. This is quite a central location. It's close to a number of bus lines, close to several amenities, grocery stores. So really, the direction that planning is going generally is to allow more density, less vehicles, especially in these downtown situations. In this case, the developer is going to increase the amount of parking because they feel that it's more marketable for the folks that they will be renting this building to.
On that note, would there be more AT infrastructure, like for bicycle storage or for e-scooters or for segways? It's not like, I think this is going to be a highly desirable location, to not have to have a car, but I'm pretty sure there's other mobile devices that will probably be engaged, and I wonder if they're going to have adequate storage for them.
So they will be meeting the minimum requirements for things like bicycle storage, and their proposal was reviewed by several other departments, including our AT folks. So they all provided positive recommendations in that regard.
Okay. I look forward to such things then. Anyone else care to comment on this?
Mr. Chair, it's Lois speaking. It was kind of a similar question. I am wondering, particularly on South Street, where it is a commuter corridor street, bus traffic, truck traffic, and I'm thinking of the example of the James, which is further up on South Street. It's as you're going down the long hill towards the intersection with South Park. The James has very inadequate accommodation for delivery trucks, moving trucks, things like that. Has the developer given any consideration regarding that issue to the stairs property?
To my knowledge, and I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. I'm just going to check quickly the site plan if you'll bear with me for a moment.
It's particularly interesting as you drive up south by the James and you are accelerating a little because it's quite a steep hill. And then there's a huge truck in front of the James parked there. And then there's 2 lanes of traffic trying to get by 5 o'clock in the afternoon with buses, etc. So I just a little curious.
Certainly. Can you see my screen?
Thank you.
Ms. York? So in this case, I don't believe, and I don't recollect that there was any proposal to affect the right of way in any way to, add any kind of lay-by or anything like that. The stairs house is proposed to be the secondary pedestrian entrance to the building, and the main entrance for deliveries and the main residential entrance will be from Harvey Street. So the thought is that most of the picking up, dropping off, and entry to the building will be taking place on that side street rather than on South Street itself.
Okay, I had missed that significant piece of information. Harvey Street is much less trafficked than south. So thank you very much. That helps.
Yeah, I also noticed that the entrance to the parking garage was proposed for Harvey Street, but I'm not gonna be able to find it now. Can we get clarification that the stairs house will not be the main entrance? Because I recall reading that it was going to be the main entrance for the new residential portion of the property, which struck me as worrisome.
That's what I had taken from it as well, Mr. Chair.
I didn't get a page number when I was reading it, so.
So the intention is for the Harvey Street entrance to be the main entrance. Stairs house to be the secondary entrance, but it will be the most prominent entrance because, of course, it'll be on the main street and through a quite a prominent building as well.
Okay. Does anyone else have any thoughts? Like it? Do you hate it? Do you approve of it? Because that's where we're headed. Okay, not hearing any more comments. I might be time to put the motion on the table. Can I get I'm going to volunteer to propose the motion, please. What's the motion? Any volunteers?
I can read the motion if you like.
Councillor Stoddard, that would be amazing. Thank you so much.
Oops, you're welcome. See my head here. All right. It is recommended that the Heritage Advisory Committee recommend that Halifax and West Community Council, 1, give notice of a motion to consider the proposed development agreement as set out in attachment A to enable an 8-story plus penthouse multi-unit residential building as an addition, to the registered heritage building located at 5241 to 5247 South Street and schedule a public hearing. 2, approve the proposed development agreement, which shall be substantially of the same form as set out in attachment A. And 3, require the agreement to be signed by the property owner within 120 days or any extension thereof granted by council on request of the property owner from the date of the final approval by council, and any other bodies as necessary, including applicable appeal periods, whichever is later. Otherwise, this approval will be void and obligations arising hereunder shall be at end.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, do we have a seconder for this motion? Please.
I'll second this.
Cassandra, thank you. All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay. All those
Affirmative.
opposed? All those opposed or any opposed? No. All right, so the motion passes. So again, congratulations. So I look forward to seeing this concluded. There are no additional items, so I will say our next meeting is August 24th, the last Wednesday in August, and I look forward to seeing everyone then. So can I entertain a motion to adjourn from someone?
Motion to adjourn and stay cool, everybody.
Councillor Hensby, thank you very much. Did we get a seconder?
Second.
Thank you, and we don't need to vote on this. So yeah, stay cool. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks all.
Enjoy
Thank
the
you,
rest of summer.
Simon. Thanks, Simon.